After my bankruptcy, I lost everything, every single thing. My construction company, my house, my truck, even my tools. 3 years ago, I was running a multi-million-dollar business, building the very terminals I now work in. Today, I shine shoes at Denver International Airport for $8 an hour plus tips. It wasn't a gradual decline. It was a brutal, swift collapse. Bad investments, a draining lawsuit, and a business partner who vanished with what little remained. Within 6 months, my life was rubble. The only thing I kept was my pride. And frankly, that's been more of a burden than a blessing. I wake up at 4:30 a.m., take 2 buses to the airport, and set up my small station near Gate B12. The irony stings, polishing shoes on my hands and knees in a place I once oversaw, a place where people in suits wouldn't have given me a second glance. Most days blur into a haze of leather conditioner and polite, meaningless small talk. I've learned to be invisible, to smile and nod while wealthy businessmen discuss deals worth more than I'll make in a decade. It's survival, pure and simple. Yesterday started like any other Tuesday. The morning rush brought the usual mix: regulars, tourists with scuffed sneakers, and the occasional business traveler who actually tipped well. I was cleaning my brushes when I heard them: expensive footsteps, Italian leather, custom made, announcing money before the person even appeared. I looked up to see a young man, early 30s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His dark hair was perfectly styled. His watch glinted under the terminal lights. Everything about him screamed success. He didn't look at me when he sat down. He just pulled out his phone and started typing with the intensity of someone whose time is measured in hundreds of dollars per minute. "Just a quick shine," he said, his voice clipped and efficient without glancing up from his screen. The tone of someone used to giving orders and having them followed without question. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. This was normal. Most customers treated me like a service, not a person. I'd stopped taking it personally a long time ago. As I worked, I found myself studying him more closely than usual. There was something familiar about his profile, a sharp jawline, aristocratic features that spoke of good breeding and better nutrition than I'd ever afforded. When he occasionally glanced up, I caught glimpses of dark eyes that seemed perpetually irritated, as if the world consistently failed to meet his expectations. I was working on his left shoe, needing to adjust his pant leg for a better angle near his ankle. That's when I saw it, a birthmark. Small, crescent-shaped, dark brown against pale skin. It was positioned just above his ankle bone, exactly where mine was. My hands froze. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what I was seeing. I have the same birthmark, in the exact same place. My mother always told me it made me special, a personal signature from God. I forced myself to keep working, but my hands were shaking. It had to be a coincidence. Birthmarks weren't that uncommon, were they? But this one was identical. The same shape, the same size, the same unusual curve that had always reminded me of a tiny crescent moon. "Are you finished?" His voice cut through my racing thoughts. I blinked, realizing I'd been staring at his ankle for what felt like an eternity. "Sorry, sir. Just making sure I got everything." I quickly finished the shine, my mind spinning. He examined his shoes with the critical eye of someone who expected perfection and usually found fault. Apparently satisfied, he pulled a $20 bill from his wallet. "Keep the change," he said, still not really looking at me. As he started to stand, something inside me snapped. Maybe it was desperation, maybe the need to know if I was losing my mind. Before I could stop myself, I spoke. "Excuse me, sir." My voice came out rougher than I intended. He paused, finally making eye contact. Up close, his eyes were even darker, almost black, with long lashes that would have been pretty on a woman. Impatience filled his gaze, the look of a busy man delayed by someone insignificant. "What is it?" My throat felt dry. Could you tell me your name?" His eyebrows drew together in a slight frown. "Why?" I scrambled for an explanation, my heart pounding. "I keep track of my regular customers," I lied. "In case you come back." He studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with The air of someone doing a small favor for someone beneath his notice. He said, "Marcus Thompson." The world tilted. Thompson. Sarah Thompson. My legs went weak, and I gripped the arm of my chair to keep from falling. Marcus Thompson. 32 years old, if I had to guess. The timing was right, the age was right, and that birthmark. "Are you all right?" he asked, his irritation now mixed with what might have been concern. I couldn't speak, couldn't even nod. I just stared at him. This successful, arrogant young man who might be my son, the child I'd never known. The baby that Sarah Thompson had carried away from me 33 years ago, without ever looking back. He took a step back, clearly uncomfortable. "Okay, well, thanks for the shine." I watched him walk away, his expensive shoes gleaming, his confident stride carrying him toward a gate where first-class passengers were already boarding. Marcus Thompson. My mind repeated the name like a prayer or a curse. I sat there for a long time, staring at the $20 bill, trying to process what had just happened. Other customers walked by, but I couldn't focus on anything except that birthmark, that name, and the terrible, wonderful possibility that the life I thought I'd lost completely might have just walked back into it, wearing a $1,000 suit. But as the shock wore off, a new feeling crept in. If Marcus Thompson was my son, then he had just looked right through me like I was nothing. He had treated me like a servant, someone so far beneath him that basic courtesy was optional. The irony was brutal and sharp. After 33 years of wondering about my child, I had finally found him, only to discover that he was everything I had once been, and everything I was no longer. The thought that followed was even worse. What if he was better off without me? What if my sudden appearance in his life would only bring him shame or disrupt the perfect world he had built? I couldn't bear the thought of hurting him, of being a burden. So I decided to keep my distance, to watch him from afar, a silent guardian in the background of his magnificent life. Weeks turned into months. I started taking on renovation work at the airport, a job that paid slightly better and allowed me to be closer to the construction sites, a world I still understood. I'd see Marcus sometimes, striding through the terminals, always surrounded by people, always in control. He was a force, a whirlwind of ambition and success, and I was just Henry Walker, a ghost from a past he didn't even know existed. One afternoon, I was working in the basement of one of the airport hotels, a property owned by Thompson Hospitality Group. I heard a commotion, a muffled sound of distress coming from a rarely used stairwell. Curiosity, or perhaps a father's instinct, pulled me towards it. I found Marcus slumped on a step, pale and gasping, clearly in the throes of a panic attack. His usual composure was shattered, replaced by raw vulnerability. Without thinking, I sat down on the step below him, far enough away that he wouldn't feel trapped, but close enough that he'd know he wasn't alone. "It's going to pass," I said, keeping my voice steady and calm. "I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but it will pass. Just focus on breathing out longer than you breathe in. Don't try to fight it. Just let it happen." He stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language, but after a moment, he nodded slightly and tried to follow my instructions. We sat there in silence for several minutes while his breathing gradually slowed and the color returned to his face. When he finally seemed stable, he looked at me with confusion and something that might have been gratitude. "How did you know what to do?" I could have lied. I could have said I'd read about panic attacks somewhere, or that I'd seen someone else go through one. Instead, I told him the truth. "Because I've been there," I said simply, "more times than I'd like to admit." He studied my face for a long moment, really looking at me for the first time since I'd started working in his building. "You work for the renovations crew." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. "Henry Walker, General Labor." "Marcus Thompson." He said it automatically, then seemed to realize how strange it was to introduce himself to someone who obviously already knew who he was. "Thank you for this. I don't usually have panic attacks in stairwells," I suggested gently. "Have witnesses when I fall apart." He almost smiled. Almost. We sat there for another moment in comfortable silence. Marcus seemed to be debating whether to leave or stay, whether to pretend this hadn't happened or acknowledge that it had. Finally, he spoke again. What triggered yours? The panic attacks, I mean. I could have given him a sanitized version. Something safe and generic about work stress, but something about the way he'd ask the question, the genuine curiosity mixed with desperation, made me want to be honest. I lost everything, I said. My business, my house, my sense of who I was. For a while, it felt like the world was ending every single day. He nodded slowly, like this made perfect sense to him. What stopped them? Time mostly. And accepting that having everything fall apart doesn't actually kill you, even though it feels like it should. Marcus was quiet for a long time, processing this. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. What if you never had anything real to begin with? What if everything you think you've built is just empty? The question hit me like a physical blow because I could hear the pain behind it. This wasn't about business or money or success. This was about a man who'd spent his entire adult life trying to prove he was worth something, only to discover that external validation couldn't fill the hole that had been carved out of him when he was too young to understand what was happening. Then you start over, I said. You figure out what's actually real, and you build from there. Easy to say when you don't have hundreds of people depending on you for their livelihoods, he said. But there was no bitterness in it, just exhaustion. Harder to do when you are trying to be everything to everyone except yourself, I countered gently. He looked at me sharply, as if I had said something that cut too close to the truth. For a moment, I thought he might get angry, might reassert his authority, and remind me that I was just a construction worker who had no business offering life advice to a successful businessman. Instead, he laughed. It was a short, bitter sound, but it was genuine. How does a guy doing renovation work know so much about existential crisis management? Same way a successful hotel mogul ends up having panic attacks in basement stairwells, I said. Life is complicated for everybody. This time his laugh was a little less bitter. He stood up slowly, straightening his tie and running his hands through his hair in an attempt to restore some semblance of his usual polished appearance. I should get back upstairs, he said. I have a meeting in 20 minutes. I nodded and started to stand as well, but he held up a hand to stop me. Henry, he said, and hearing my name in his voice made something twist in my chest. This conversation, I'd prefer if it stayed between us. Of course, I said. Your business is your business. He nodded gratefully, then started up the stairs. But halfway to the next landing, he stopped and turned back. If you ever want to talk, he said awkwardly, as if he wasn't sure how to make the offer. About the panic attacks or whatever. I'm usually here most afternoons around 3. It wasn't much, but it was an opening, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. As I watched him disappear up the stairs, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Over the next several days, I found myself looking forward to 3 o'clock in a way that had nothing to do with work schedules. Marcus began acknowledging me when he walked through the lobby, not quite smiling, but no longer looking through me like I was invisible. Sometimes, if his afternoon rounds finished early, he would stop by wherever I was working, and we would have brief, careful conversations about nothing in particular. He never mentioned the panic attack again, but I could see him watching me sometimes, studying my face like he was trying to solve a puzzle. There was something almost desperate about the attention he paid to our conversations, as if he was starving for genuine human interaction and didn't quite know how to ask for it. I learned things about him during those brief encounters that no business magazine had ever reported. He was afraid of elevators, but rode them constantly to hide the fear. He hated public speaking, yet forced himself to do it for his company. He was driven by an almost manic need for control, a need that seemed to stem from a deep-seated fear of unpredictability. He was, in many ways, the mirror image of my former self, before life had stripped away my illusions of control. One afternoon, as we were talking in a quiet corner of the hotel lobby, I noticed his gaze lingering on my left ankle. He'd seen it, the birthmark. My heart pounded. This was it, the moment of truth. He looked up at me, his dark eyes searching mine. You have one too, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The same one. I nodded, unable to speak. My mother's, Sarah, she told me it was unique, that it was a mark of something special. He trailed off, his gaze returning to my ankle, then to his own. It is special, I said, my voice thick with emotion. It's a connection, a sign. He looked at me, a flicker of understanding, then confusion crossing his face. A sign of what? I took a deep breath. Marcus, I began. My name is Henry Walker, and I'm your father. The words hung in the air, heavy and fragile. His face went utterly blank, then a storm of emotions flashed through his eyes. Disbelief, anger, pain, and finally, a profound sadness. My father, he repeated, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. But my mother always said he left, that he didn't want me. She was wrong, I said, my voice cracking. I never left, I never knew. She took you away, Marcus. She disappeared, and I spent 33 years wondering what happened to my son. He stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps away, then turning back to face me, his hands clenched. Why now? Why tell me now, after all these years? Because I saw you, I said, meeting his gaze. I saw that birthmark on your ankle at the airport. I asked your name. And when you said Marcus Thompson, my world stopped. I've been watching you, Marcus. I've been here, in the background, trying to figure out how to tell you without disrupting your life. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a gesture of deep distress. My whole life, a lie? Not a lie, exactly, I said gently. More like a story that was incomplete. Your mother, Sarah, she was scared. We were young. She thought she was protecting you, protecting herself. She thought I couldn't give you what you needed. She wanted control, Marcus corrected, his voice tight. She wanted to write the story herself instead of letting it unfold naturally. And in doing that, she robbed both of us of 33 years. We sat there in the basement storage room, surrounded by paint cans and construction equipment, father and son, finally seeing each other clearly for the first time. The expensive suit and the work clothes didn't matter. The corner office and the studio apartment were irrelevant. What mattered was that we were here together, with the possibility of building something real from the wreckage of missed opportunities. So, what happens now? I asked. Marcus smiled, and it was the first completely genuine smile I'd ever seen from him. Now we start over. We figure out how to be a family, even though neither of us really knows how to do that. I don't have much to offer you, I said. No money, no status, no connections that would help your business. You have something better than all of that, Marcus said. You have the ability to see me as a person instead of just my achievements. Do you know how valuable that is? Over the next several months, Marcus and I began the careful process of building a relationship that had been 33 years in the making. It wasn't always easy. We both carried scars from our respective histories of abandonment and disappointment. But for the first time in either of our lives, we had someone who understood what those scars meant. Marcus offered me a job at Thompson's Hospitality Group, not as general labor, but as a project consultant, helping with construction oversight on new hotel developments. The pay was more than I'd ever imagined making, but more importantly, it meant I could be part of his world without feeling like charity. I moved out of my studio apartment and into a small house that Marcus helped me buy, not as a gift, but as an investment in our shared future. We had dinner together twice a week, and slowly, carefully, we began filling in the blank spaces that had defined both our lives. The most remarkable change was in Marcus himself. As he began to trust that I wasn't going to disappear, the angry, isolated businessman began to give way to someone warmer and more connected. His employees noticed the difference immediately. The explosive outbursts stopped. The rigid perfectionism softened into high standards tempered with compassion. 6 months after that conversation in the storage room, I was at Marcus's apartment for our weekly dinner when he brought out a photograph I'd never seen before. It was Sarah, young and beautiful, holding a baby who could only have been Marcus. I found this in some of her papers, he said. Look at the back. I turned the photograph over. In Sarah's careful handwriting were the words, Marcus, age 6 months. He has his father's hands. I stared at the inscription, feeling a complicated mixture of pain and gratitude. Even as she'd been building walls between us, Sarah had recognized the connection that couldn't be erased. She knew, Marcus said quietly. She knew you were part of me, even when she was trying to pretend you weren't. That night, as I drove home through the streets of Denver, I thought about the strange journey that had brought us to this point. I'd lost everything. My business, my house, my sense of identity, only to find the one thing I'd never dared hope I could recover. Marcus and I would never get back those 33 lost years. We couldn't undo the damage that had been done by well-meaning lies and fear-based decisions. But we could build something new from what remained, something stronger for having been broken and rebuilt. I'd spent my adult life believing that love was something you earned through achievement and success. My son had spent his believing that love was something that could be withdrawn without warning. Together, we were learning that real love, the kind that lasts, doesn't depend on what you can provide or how perfectly you perform. It depends on showing up, staying present, and choosing each other every day, even when it's difficult. The shoe shine station at Denver International Airport had been replaced by a newer model. But sometimes when I was traveling for work, I would stop by Gate B12 and remember the morning when everything changed. The day when a crescent-shaped birthmark had revealed a truth that 33 years of separation couldn't erase. That some connections are stronger than abandonment, deeper than disappointment, and more enduring than the stories we tell ourselves about why we're alone. I wasn't alone anymore. Neither was Marcus. And for the first time in either of our lives, we both understood what it meant to be truly family.